This fly is called an RC fly, and it's called an RC fly because the dubbing has rock chuck fur in it, and it's a Bill Sheese pattern. Bill Sheese is the guru of Henry's Lake, if you don't know who he is, but he's a great stillwater fly fisherman, and a lot of the flies that I fish with are his patterns or stuff that I have modified from him. So I tie this typically on a size 10 2X long hook. This is just a 9671. Sometimes I tie it on a Gamakatsu S10, but I fish this fly mostly when it's kind of damsel season. It's not a real damsel pattern imitation, but it works really well during damsel season. But it also, will work pretty well all year long. And I should be using olive thread on it. I'm going to use brown because I'm using brown on another fly. And just to save time changing threads, I'm going to stick with the one and make it do a couple of different jobs. But it's close enough. I like to dress my hook and put a little glue over all the thread when you dress the hook on to start with. Another thing I like to do is use woolly bugger marabou. It's not the long fibers, but typically I don't want a long tail on these flies. So I'll usually try and get 3 different flies out of one piece of woolly bugger marabou. I just strip some of the feather down off the side, bunch it up into a bundle, and trim off the junky end, and lay it down across the body of the fly and tie it in. I don't like the tail too long because it gets way too long to look like a damselfly nymph if you string it out there, so I shorten up the tail pretty much. And I also, just for a little color and glitter, I put 3 strands of root beer crystal flash into the tail. I try to lay them in there so that they basically get a strand on each side and one on the top or bottom. After I get them tied in, I like to take the strands back towards the back and tie them over the top so it locks them good and tight so they don't pull out. And for this fly, I like to use a dubbing loop, and I learned a little trick. If you haven't seen it, it's a great one. This is just a piece of plastic. Actually, I think it's a part of the carton that lettuce comes in that my wife gets. So a friend of mine showed me this trick. You take the glue out of a glue mouse trap and put a little gob of it on a piece of plastic about the middle of the strip, then fold it over and put a staple through it and offset the edges so that you can slide it down your line, and it makes the stickiest, nicest dubbing cement I've ever used, and you don't get anything on you or anything, but it makes for a great dubbing loop. And then I'll build a little dubbing loop and take my rock chuck fly dubbing, and if anybody's interested, I do have a recipe that you can make your own out of this. So I have some cards up here if you want to email me for any information. I'd be happy to send you anything I can. I don't overly dub this to. Another neat little tying trick, if you're not familiar with them, are these floss pullers that you can buy a package of 25 for about $3 at the Walmart or any place like that, but they make a great thread puller, and they don't damage ceramic bobbins like the metal ones do. these bobbins that are using, if you haven't seen them, they're spring retractable. But when you cut your thread, it sucks it all the way in, so you have to live with that. And I adjust that a little bit so that it's thinner towards the back and thicker at the front. And just pull that back and build a little bit of a head. Not much. Then after I've got to this point, I also take 3 more strands and make of the root beer crystal flash and just make it like a little wing over the top of the body. It just brightens up the fly. I do some with and some without. Some days the fish seem to want things a little more subtle, but more times than not it works better with the flash wing than it does without. And then too, after I've got it started, I lock in my fibers so they don't pull out easily. Just build a little head on it, and whip finish, and that's all there is to the fly. It's very simple, but it's one of my most successful overall still water patterns. I use it often and a lot, but I also tie the exact same pattern in a rust colored and use a little copper crystal flash in it instead of all root beer, and I tie it in a blonde one. A lot of times I'm finding, especially more lately, that a lot of the damselflies out there are a lot lighter colored. So if you see damsel nymphs that are lighter, I tie this exact same pattern in a light pattern. I'm going to show one, but it's out of my reach there. Anyway, that is the Bill Sheets' RC fly. Real simple pattern, and then simple is my favorite. Okay, the next fly up is an orange blossom special, and it's kind of a takeoff on California leech, which are California Dreamin', which is another Bill Sheets pattern, but I wanted it more leechy looking, so I worked out a kind of a trick, dubbing trick that I use on lots of different patterns of flies now, and I found it very successful and really durable for dubbed fly patterns. This is on a 3x long size 10 hook, so just a little bit longer shank. I also move it up onto a number 8 3x long sometimes. Again, I dress the body and cover that. If you've ever had flies that the body starts twisting on you after you cast it a little bit, putting that little bit of glue over your thread when you're dressing the body really slows that down from happening. Again, this is rusty brown woolly bugger marabou. not familiar with that trick, if you cut the tail off on marabou with your scissors, it looks like somebody with a flat top in the military aircraft. But if you just pinch the ends of it off, it comes out pretty naturally looking, and you don't destroy the fly. Even up these ends. Found these little electrical clamps are really handy for holding on to things like crystal flash and flashaboo, so you don't lose it all over too. Okay, what I'm going to do with this fly is tie in a hackle feather. This hackle I'm going to tie in from the tip first, and I want to splay back the edges on it. And I'm also going to build a dubbing loop on this fly. Again, using my rat trap glue to help contain the dubbing a little bit. This dubbing is California leech dubbing. So the California leech is tied just exactly, or California dreamin', some people call it. It's tied just like the RC is, and I liked it, but I wanted it a little bulkier so to look more like a burnt orange leech. You see quite a few burnt orange leeches in both Strawberry and Henry's Lake, so I wanted this a little bulkier and bigger. And I'm going to get my dubbing loop started. Then I'm going to take my hackle feather and wrap that in with my dubbing loop and get it going, and spin the hackle right into the dubbing too. It makes your hackle feather extremely durable because it's all wrapped in there, and gives the fly a really nice effect. 5 or 6 years ago, this was my, maybe 7 years ago, was my very best fly for 3 or 4 years on Strawberry. It still works, but it doesn't work as good as it did then. And I wish I could figure out how those fish change their appetites and why they do.
Are you fishing this on the surface or subsurface?
Subsurface. This one I fish typically on a type 4 sinking line and fish it, subsurface, but I fish it towards the shore and bring it around, and I think it imitates a crayfish some of the time, maybe. Also, it does an imitation as the orange leech, and I'm not sure, but I fish it shallow and deep, but always subsurface. Same with the RC fly. I fished the RC fly a lot on an intermediate line and fished it right in shallow water close to shore, but I've the same had great success with it out in deep water and fishing it deeper on faster sinking lines.
Have you ever experimented with putting lead on it by any chance?
Putting what?
Lead on it?
I I like to use my sinking lines to get my flies where I want. I feel like if I weight my still water flies, the fly sinks more than the line does, and they're in the weeds all the time. So if I use my line to go down, the line is usually fishing a little lower than the fly is, and as you strip it, it's moving right across the top of the weeds. And that could be all in my head, but it works for me. So. Again, this is a real simple pattern, and it's just darn near indestructible. I don't know if my friend Jeff Wagner's here or not, but I know he had one. I think he caught 37 fish on it or something at Strawberry one day that I'd given him. And cutthroats are notorious for tearing up flies. So. I haven't really. I don't fish it on top very much. When I do, it's usually during the Calabatus hatch, and once in a while mouse patterns. Fishing dry mouse around, even out in the open water in Strawberries, can be surprisingly effective. It's really unusual, but it depends on the years. Some years there's a lot more mice out there than other years, but on the years when the mice are prevalent. The next fly that I'm going to tie, it's called a black and purple Matuka, and it's a good early summer, late spring fly. Lots of places. Again, I use it a ton at Strawberry, and even going into the hot part of the summer, fishing it deep on the Soldier Creek side out in 60 and 70 feet of water on a type 7 line. It's an amazingly effective pattern. I generally tie this fly a little larger. I think this is actually going to be on a size 6 Gamakatsu S11S hook. And I love, for the big cutthroats at Strawberry, I really like fishing Gamakatsu hooks. They're expensive, but they just are so sharp. I think my number of hookups increases about 25% over fishing a less expensive hook, for sure. I do this fly with 2 different colors of purple crystal flash. I don't know if you can see those. One of them's a darker one of them's a lighter, kind of a lavender purple. Both of them work well, and they both work at different times, it seems like. So having both colors in your arsenal is not a bad thing. No, it's not, but you could certainly try it. I haven't played around with it. I'm sure it'd work good if you did. Just reattach my thread at the back, and I'm using a black Zonker style rabbit strip. And I'm going to make the tail just about the length of the body. once I've got my tail up prepared, I like to take a little bit of super glue. This is crazy glue, but it's just super glue. And put a little on there and actually all the way across the top of the fly. This thread that I'm using on this, I call it magic thread, but it's actually a real fine fluorocarbon. So it's really nice to use when you have to run through materials because it's so thin and still quite strong. It just disappears running through a material. I'm going to work that up to about the middle section of the fly and separate the fur again just to tie that body in a little better. And do just one wrap around that. Cramp in my hand. Take that up, and you can do it either two different ways. Sometimes on this one with the longer rabbit fur, I'll just tie this off here and trim it, and then cut it and make a little bib of rabbit fur and tuck it under. If it's a bigger pattern fly than this, I'll actually wrap a collar with the fur all the way around, but on this size fly, if you do it, it covers up too much of the body.
It's gonna hurt.
With this magic thread, it's so slippery and fine, I definitely like to double whip finish when I'm using it. And even a little touch of super glue on the head of it. I hate it when flies fall apart on me. Okay, that's a black and purple Matuka. It's a good bug too, I'll tell you. Next up is the Manitoba Minnow. This Manitoba Minnow pattern came about. My wife and I and Jeff and Char Wagner from the club were we went to Manitoba fishing. We've gone a few times and had really fun trips back there, but we typically have gone early June, and a few years back we decided to make a fall trip, and we got there and we just had a heck of a time catching fish. They just were not happening. The water was too warm, and the clouds weren't falling in order. My wife was out in the lake, it was almost noon, and she caught the first trout of the day. It was only about a 16-inch rainbow, which is tiny for that area. And she brought it up and put it on her stripping apron, and it threw up about 50 little tiny minnows, about maybe 3/4 of an inch long. And they looked a lot like this Manitoba minnow, although this one I'm going to tie a little larger. But I thought, I can imitate that. So we went in for lunch, and I got out my tying vise and put this pattern together. And I made 4 of them. I kept 2, and I gave my wife 1 and my friend Jeff 1. And we all went out and we all started out with that fly, and in about the first 5 minutes, all three of us were hooked up at the same time. It saved our day for the trip. But since then, I tie it from like 2 sizes larger than this down as small as a 14, excuse me, and have fished it in all kinds of water. Any place you see good quantities of minnow along shorelines, it's been working really well. Lately, we've been fishing it as a perch minnow. I've been putting some bars down the body on the thing, and it imitated a perch minnow pretty well too. But it's a fly you can fish with confidence lots of places. And to get some of the perch minnow effect, I found using a little bit of just a off yellow or lighter yellow yarn as an underbody to help build the body. I use a mylar ribbon for the body itself, and this yellow underneath the mylar ribbon gives it just a little bit of a yellow cast like the perch minnows have, so it's worked out pretty well. Work it back and taper the body so it gives it a little bit of a belly like the true minnow has. This is the mylar ribbon. You can find similar stuff to it at, well, fabric stores actually, I think is where this came from, but you can get some similar materials, diamond braid material from the fly shops that works pretty adequately too. This ribbon is thin enough that whatever color you put under it, it carries the cast of that material. Or you can layer it up and just keep it thick and stay with the mylar look, and that works pretty well sometimes too. Depends on what the minnows you're trying to imitate look like. This is olive pine squirrel. I'm going to give it about the same treatment that I gave the Matuka. Separate the hair. And again, when I get the hair, everything all ready to go. Whoops, I got to get my thread in the right place first. this one I do use the squirrel and just do a one wrap around for a collar. It gives it kind of a gill effect. And all of these patterns are really simple. There's not a lot of trick technique or anything to tying them, and I promise you they function well in still water, and some of them will work pretty well in stream, river access too. Maybe we'll turn this one into a perch too. They just have little car marks down their sides, and does a pretty good job of making a perch imitation. This next pattern I'm going to tie is a pattern that Jeff Wagner, one of our club members and a past president, came up with, and I ripped it off from him and modified it into lots of different colors and sizes and shapes. But it's been an amazingly functional pattern. In this version itself, it's probably accounted for 40 or 45% of all the fish I've caught in Stillwater in the last 3 or 4 years. So, and it's worked lots of places, especially places where there are chub minnows in the water. We call this a white polar bunny. And it's called a white polar bunny because it's tied with white rabbit fur, zonk style rabbit, and this UV copper olive polar chenille. This stuff is available in lots of different colors and in some different sizes and shapes, and it's been really fun product to play with. Tie a lot of different patterns using this stuff now, but this combination has been a money fly. I'll switch to white number 70 thread. This fly has a real tendency to unwrap in the water after the rabbit gets all soaking wet on it. So I go to some extra efforts on it to try and make it stay secure. And you start out the tail about the same way as the last 2 flies, just make the tail about the length of the body of the hook shank. If you tie much with hair, having a little jar of water close by really makes working with the rabbit fur a lot easier. Now this, instead of just
Spit on it.
yeah, but it makes you choke. Well, I completely coat the body of this fly with this super glue. tie in the tail, I try to do 6 good solid wraps. And then another couple in front and a half hitch just to keep it from coming undone after it gets wet. And when you tie in the puller chenille, I like to separate the fibers and get them to where they are all pointing towards the tail of the fly. And tie it in. And I like to tie a fairly big piece in on the shank, because this stuff is woven together, and if you just tie in the tip, it'll pull apart on you. And the trick, for me at least, to make this fly easier to do, I don't know if Jim's out there watching or not, he said he was having trouble with tying this fly, is before you start to wrap the puller chenille, you go over the top one time with your rabbit and get them all together. I don't know if you can see that or not, but now I'm holding the puller chenille and the rabbit together in my same fingers, and I'm just going to start wrapping forward. Sometimes you need to stop and brush it out so it doesn't all clump up on you. I tie this fly in olive and in gray and in a blue color and in yellow and in cream, and they've all been successful, and using different colors of puller chenille as well with those combinations. So it's a whole new game you can come up with for fly tying patterns. But literally every one of them that I've tried, I've caught fish on. But this one has definitely been the best of the. Again, to try and keep it from unwrapping, I really tie the head on as tight and secure as I can. Pattern seems to work the best later in the year, towards fall and going in and through winter time, but it will work all year. And again, it seems to work best where there are chub minnows. It looks quite a bit the color of a chub minnow when it's in the water. Doesn't look very much like a minnow now. When it's swimming, that rabbit fur really undulates and moves great through the water. Okay, there's Jeffrey's puller bunny. Started messing around with ultraviolet color patterns, and I tied a pattern that we tried up in Island Park, Idaho on Hebgen Reservoir, and it just worked amazing, and I only tied a few of them, so I went back and tied a bunch more, and I was trying to come up with a name for it. And I have a nephew, he literally is a rocket scientist. He works for ATK, or what used to be Thiokol, out at okay. Anyway, I was trying to come up with a name for this fly and told him it was the UV material, and he said, well, he said ultraviolet light is measured with the Angstrom scale. He said that fish can see colors 300 and 400 angstrom that humans can't, so it shows up. So this fly became the Angstrom 300 with a brown olive and 400 with a brighter olive. So, but it's absolutely the simplest fly I ever tie, and it can catch fish. Huh, Brent? Oh, I mean, I had an amazing day on Hebgen with it 2 years ago. Again, I'm using scope and olive woolly bugger marabou for the tail. I don't tie flies to sell them, but if I had a market for these, I could make money tying them.
John?
Yes, sir.
With tails, are the tail lengths important to you?
You know, I don't like them too long. The fish seem to nip at them and stuff. You know, on most of my woolly beggar patterns, I tie them much shorter than most people do. I don't tie them as long as the hook shank on my woolly beggar pattern. And they don't seem to wrap around the fly as badly when you do that too. Longer tails seem to wrap around the hook shank and foul all the time. And if you do them a little shorter, they don't.
With that long tail, you get a lot of false strikes.
Yeah, with a real long tail, like on the polar bunny and stuff, you'll get a cutthroats will just tap it up to death. You have to have lots of patience and not set till the fly is for sure hooked up on it. But these shorter ones seem to help solve that problem. But you need the length on those minnow patterns to make it look like the minnow. Although Bill Quap that was talking back there had one of the Manitoba minnows that he tore the tail off of, and he kept catching fish with no tail on it pretty well the rest of the day. Some of the fly boxes that I keep on my kick boat all the time are up here in front, so after the meeting, if you want to come around and look at them, they're not very pretty. They're all experienced flies for the most part, so but you can get an idea of what I keep with me on my kick boat. Well, that one's so simple, I'm not sure it's even worth passing around. Angstrom 300. And that's going to be a wrap for the fly tie-in. I didn't think I'd get that many done. So.